I thought it was interesting. It's always interesting to hear from an author herself, and especially because I thought that the photos added something. And of course, there are photos of the ship that were taken, of course, before this final voyage. But so that's what she's sharing with us. Were some of those old photos. So that gives you a little.
Excuse me. We can't start the video. I think Debbie has to do that.
You can't. Pardon?
It says you cannot start your video because the host has disabled it.
Oh,
That's not true. I
Okay.
start you. You can do it yourself.
try it yourself, where it says start video.
I've done it several times.
I'm able to start my video.
Debbie, can you hit start video for some people? Okay.
Yes,
Hopefully that's helping.
Melissa's
Good.
done it.
That helping you? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Great.
Not,
Okay.
not me, Debbie.
Who is that?
I'm having a problem.
I still can't open mine,
Let me
Linda.
just say this, instead of, how about this, just write in the chat if you're having an issue so Lynda can keep going, and then I'll go ahead and take care of you.
Great. Thank you. Debbie, thank you for showing that video. You're so masterful these days with Zoom, so we really appreciate it. Thank you. So you got a little bit of a background about the ship itself, and of course, going back to the story, the summary in the story, remember, she shows you how it was freezing. In 1945, it was World War II drawing to a close in East Prussia, and we've got these freezing temperatures outside. Thousands of refugees are on a desperate trek towards freedom, and many of them have something to hide. And among them are a group that meet on the country roads, and they are young. Many of them are teenagers, and they're caught in between. The Third Reich is collapsing, and the Russians, the scary Russians, are advancing. And we see that they are trapped between the German conquerors of East Prussia and their terrifying Russian liberators. And they are scared of those Russians. And of course, we will see why. And among them that have joined together are Joanna, a 21-year-old Lithuanian with nursing experience. And we realize she is overcome with guilt, although as the story begins, we have no idea why. We meet Amelia. She's a 15-year-old Polish girl. She's 8 months pregnant, and she has a horrific story. And we meet Florian, a 20-year-old Prussian soldier. He has his own secret, and he carries a pack that he will never leave out of his sight. And of course, we know that he is escaping with stolen Nazi treasure, which turns out to be Hitler's favorite piece from the Amber Room. And they are traveling en route to a port where they are hoping they can board a ship that will hopefully take them to safety. And two bad things end up happening at the port. They meet up with Alfred. Who's he? A Nazi peon with delusions of grandeur. He's a sailor who fancies himself a hero while he cleans the toilets. And the ship that they board is the Wilhelm Gustloff. Circumstances force these people to unite, and it becomes necessary for them to learn to trust each other. And just when it feels like they take off, this ship is going, they're on their way to freedom, the ship is struck by a Russian torpedo, and the ship, which was built for 1,500, is now carrying over 10,000 people. And of course, that ship begins to sink, and everyone is fighting for survival. And in the end, 9,500 something are going to perish in the sinking of the Wilhelm Gustloff. Now, as the author told us, the story is told in alternating points of view. The backstories of the individual characters unfold slowly. Each of these characters, in the end, depict the horror and the suffering the war creates. What's especially interesting in the book, of course, is this true story, the true tragedy of the sinking of the Wilhelm Gustloff. It's considered to be, and it's strange because none of us, I don't think, or so few of us have ever really heard of this tragedy of the sinking of the Wilhelm Gustloff. It's considered to be the largest, the greatest maritime disaster in history. Way more people lost lives than in the Lusitania and the Titanic together. This book, by the way, has won all kinds of awards. It sheds light on a piece of history with which many of us are unfamiliar. So you have heard a little bit of background about the ship itself, and later I did a little research, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the Amber Room, because that was the other thing that sort of piqued my interest in reading the book. What I want to ask you now, and of course more of the story will come out as we discuss, but what I want to begin with is asking you, what were your thoughts about her style of writing? Did you like her style of writing? What did you find interesting about her style of writing? What comments do you want to make about her style?
Hi, Lynda. Hi. So I didn't like the beginning, like how she just started with, I mean, I liked it overall, but at the beginning, it just started Joanna, guilt. It didn't give you any like background. It was just, I didn't like that part. But once I did get into it, I liked the style of writing.
So in other words, that's the thing about the alternating, the different points of view. She shows us, we meet the characters as they appear on stage, so to speak, and their backstory unfolds slowly. Yeah, you had to have patience, right, with this one. Anyone else have a comment about style?
There's a couple comments have come in on the chat. JC said, I like it. A few from each person. Stephanie said she found it difficult to get into the characters. And Jackie also said that she agrees with Jillian that it was confusing at first, but generally people are liking the multi-character point of view. Fern said she loved it, like poetry, the way she switched characters, the intensity of the phrasing, and it was intense.
What do
And
you think about the chapters? Nobody's mentioning the chapters. They were all of a page or a page and a half. What do you think of that?
I love that part.
An easier read that way. Anybody else have comments about that? You kept the story moving, huh?
It did.
It's interesting about the alternating points of view. She, in one of her interviews, she says, while researching, I was reminded that many different regions or countries were affected and suffered evacuation and expulsion. And she talks about how when she interviewed the people, she realized, and again, she mentions this in her comments that you see in the video we saw, that she likes to show characters through their own cultural lens. And that's one of the reasons why she decided to give each character their own regional experience and allow the reader to look through their lens. So I thought that was interesting to hear her perspective. Anything else you want to talk about with her style? What'd you think about the idea that she kept repeating, that idea that she says, guilt is a hunter, fate is a hunter, shame is a hunter, fear is a hunter. And in those first few chapters, she ends every line with bang. Did you find that to be effective? Did you wonder about that? What did that do for you? In terms of style again.
It made me keep rereading it. I couldn't remember I was like, am I reading the same thing? Is it like, I had to kind of figure what that meant character.
I enjoyed it. I don't have a hand.
Somebody's muted or something.
This is Eva.
I think
Eva, did you have something?
Eva's trying to say something, but she's not close enough to the mic.
Yes, okay, I forgot I also need my mic. I enjoyed the book generally. The idea that it was written for young adults was excellent in this case. And the so-and-so is a hunter, shame is a hunter, it referred to each character. Each character had somewhat different reactions.
To each character. So we'll talk about that when we talk about it. I thought it was very effective because it was a way of introducing each character. And I don't know about you, but I was curious. Why is guilt a hunter in this one? Why is fate a hunter? Why is fear a hunter, or shame, as we were introduced to the characters?
Also, Leslie and Jackie have their hands up. So Leslie, do you want to unmute?
Oh.
Leslie,
I think you have to unmute.
she is unmuted. We can't hear you, Leslie.
This is Eva Abramczyk again, if I may. I lived in that area at that time, and at the end of the war, I was 15. And I grew up in Danzig throughout the war with my father and mother doing slave labor.
Eva, it's difficult to understand you. Can you get closer to the mic, to the,
Yes, I can.
go
Can you
ahead.
hear me now?
Yes, yes,
I grew up in Danzig all through the war with
yes,
both of my parents doing slave labor, my father in a labor camp in France, because we were German Jews, but I don't want to get into my personal history.
right.
It would take too long. But I found this book especially interesting. I did know for many years about the Yugoslav, and several of my friends and acquaintances were on ships that did not sink and got out safely, some smaller ships. And they did not go to Gdynia, which it was called Gotenhafen in the book. A name I never heard. I think that was a Nazi name after the
Yes.
Nazis took over. Gdynia is what we called it before the war.
Yes, they make that, she makes that comment that that's what it was called, the original name of that, Gdynia, as opposed to,
Gdynia,
that was
and-
the Germans took it over and they changed the names of things, yeah.
Yes, but during the Danzig time, if we spoke German, it was Gdynia, close to Gdynia.
Right.
The
Thank you.
Gotenhafen escaped me.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Yes, if there's anything more I can contribute later, you can call on me.
Thank you. Thank you. Any thoughts that you guys have on why the title, Salt to the Sea? Anything about the title? Why do you think that was the title that the author selects?
Jackie has her hand up. So Jackie, do you want to unmute?
I actually through the whole book felt like Salt to the Sea meant all of their agony, their tears, their frustration going into the sea. And it ended up with the ship sinking, that it was all there too. That may be way off base, but that's what I felt the whole time. It was their agony and their despair.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that totally is part of it. Anyone else have a thought?
She actually used that line.
She did use the line, and here's what it is. It's when Joanna wonders, as the ship is going down, and she wonders, she's in this lifeboat now, and she wonders what news will come to her family, to her hometown about the disaster. She pictures the news they will hear. Your daughter, your sister, she is salt to the sea. That's how she's picturing her obituary. So in that context, what might you think salt to the sea? What it made me think of, yeah?
Stephanie
Somebody
said salt and tears, and Sharon also said tears. So
Tears.
mhm.
Absolutely, absolutely. And also what I thought about was when her life is gone, when her life is lost, and her story is lost, and her voice is lost, she will be nothing more than salt that like blends and ultimately disappears into the sea. So that was sort of what I thought of. I thought it was a very appropriate, certainly, and for all of the reasons we've all mentioned, I think it was a really good title for the book.
It's like the death of all these people, the death of their pain too, though, the death of their suffering also.
Absolutely. Yeah. Eva, I think, hit on the idea that this was a young adult novel, as well as, of course, for older readers. How did it strike you? Yeah.
I just wanted to mention that tears are salty. And so the
Tears are
tears
salty.
that are going into the ocean is also the obituary, the tears and the salt of them.
Yes. It's the tears. It's all of their hopes and their dreams and whatever their life would have been into the sea. As a young adult novel, Where do you think it was so successful? In other words, how was it a young adult novel? What made it a young adult novel? Perhaps maybe different from something that wouldn't be considered a crossover novel.
Amelia's age.
Amelia's age, not only Amelia, but all of the characters. Florian was young, early 20, he was 19 or 20. Joanna was young, 20, 21. Yeah, all of them young. What else? It's interesting that the author tells us she always has wanted to highlight the struggle of children, the idea that so many children were orphaned during the war, that teenagers were having to make it on their own. They were sort of not here, not there, not adult, not children, and they were struggling on their own. And the other thing about this being a young adult novel, one of the reviewers said, here's a quote, "Without cramming the novel with too much historical information, Cepetis is able to transport her readers to another time." So what's interesting is the way that the novel moves. You can see where it would really hold the interest, perhaps, of younger readers as well. And it doesn't perhaps have as much history as perhaps another book might have had. So it's interesting.
Leslie has her hand up, Lynda, and
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Can you hear
Yes.
me now?
yes, now
Yes,
we can.
Okay.
We got you now, Leslie.
Okay, first of all, I wanted to comment way back about the short chapters, which I really enjoyed. You know, getting into the characters, just hearing enough and then going into the next one, you really get to see the relationship between them, the interaction. And as far as young adult, having taught college students, I know they don't like to read long chapters and long books. So I think that they would enjoy the shortness of it. But also, we often talk about the fact that we get history up into a certain point, but we never really learn about more modern history. And I don't even remember ever studying World War II when I was in high school. And this gave me a more interesting and more informative background on the war. I had a grandfather from Poland. I had a grandmother from Lithuania. And here, you know, we were seeing that in action, people from there in action. So that was very meaningful to me.
I agree with you. I think that the history part is really, really fascinating. And again, it is something that we really did not learn. And especially, why didn't we learn this? Because it was the other side of the war, right? I think that was part of it. It was from the German perspective as opposed to from the Allies.
We're so used to the Germans being the enemy, and here they were running from the Russians, which I found an incredible piece of information, not being familiar with that part of the, you know, world history.
Right, right. I think so too.
But Lynda, there was a comment which is interesting. It said, I think finding out that the entire ship lies on the bottom holds interest for young readers. And Lynda also wrote that she has a cousin in Sweden who knew all about the ship. And just to piggyback on what Lynda's saying, I do think that her imagery was really for a younger reader too. Like you did kind of really understand where they were and all that type of thing. So it was very real, like, and that whole idea of that ship on the bottom of the Baltic.
Right. It holds a lot of mystery, right? The fact that there are so many secrets there. Did it hold the amber room? Did it not hold the amber room? I think, by the way, the other thing we didn't even talk about as far as style in the book, I love what she did at the end. Did you all enjoy that also? How she shared her interviews with the woman, the journalist who had written the nonfiction book about this, called Death in the Baltic. With the divers, she talked to them, and she shared those thoughts, what it was like for them to come across the ship. And again, I'm sure young readers enjoyed it as much as we did, the idea of what they saw when they actually went down and saw this, being among the first of the divers to ever really see this, to see this shipwreck. I want to talk a little bit about the individual characters. I think in one of the interviews I read, the author says that her inspiration for the characters, always in all of her novels, it comes from her research. She says she comes upon a story or a detail or a character, and many come to her when she is interviewing the people who themselves are characters many times. And she will interview the people who experienced the event, and she will try to interview as many people as possible. And then she weaves together their story into one character. And that way, she says, I'm representing a larger human experience. So having said that, let's talk about Joanna. What are some of her characteristics? How would you describe her? And why is she introduced with the line, guilt is a hunter? What do we know about Joanna? Diane, do you have your hand up? Unmute yourself.
She felt guilty because she felt like she caused the death of her cousins. So that was always stuck with her. But I thought she was a very thoughtful, caring person who was not only as a nurse per se, but just even, the blind person that was on the trip with them. She was always thinking about her. I just felt she was very caring and thoughtful.
She exemplified so much kindness, right? She was so caring, as you say. Absolutely, yes. What else about her? So she had this nursing experience, and we know that she is guilty. She feels that, because her father had warned her, don't write the letter, right? Don't write anything. Don't tell anyone we are escaping. We're on Stalin's list. And what does she do? She writes to her cousin, which is why in her mind, haunted by this fact, I am a murderer. Because what happened when the Russians came, they found out that their family had escaped, but they went ahead and took it all out on this cousin's family. So she feels like she is a murderer. She's haunted by the guilt of that. We see her kindness with Ingrid, with the blind woman. We see her kindness also with the little boy, right? The 6-year-old, the wandering boy, Klaus. Anything else you want to say about her? We see that she's a risk taker, and we see that she's not afraid. At one point, if you remember Eva, who is they describe her sort of as a Viking kind of woman. She's a very large woman. She wants to get rid of Amelia, who's the Polish girl, right? And she wants to get rid of Florian, and she wants to get rid of them for various reasons. And of course, what does she say? Joanna says, no, listen, this is my horse that's carrying the cart. And she says, unless you want to walk with this cart, it's my way or the highway, so to speak. And she insists on keeping them with the group. So she's really a risk taker. We also see that she is the glue that holds the group together, right? What else about her that's interesting? Remember, she's young.
Leslie has her hand up.
Yeah. I like the way she was, the way she acted with, I can't remember his name, the Prussian. Yes, Florian. She was attracted to him, and she was very human in that sense, but she was also cautious, and, was such a bad situation. But you could see, when she kissed him, I thought that was a very nice scene. I like that scene a lot.
Sweet scene, yeah.
Yeah.
So in this respect, the author says that she likes to make her fictional characters a composite to represent groups of people. She wants us to remember the thousands of real people that her fictional characters represent. So in the character of Joanna, what group of people do you think she's trying to represent? What does she bring to mind of so many people that were lost during the war, certainly in the sinking of the ship? What group of people does she bring to mind? Would she represent, Joanna? So just to start us off, I will say to you that she represented in my mind that whole group of people of the age where they would have been studying professionally. They would have been maybe in one of their first jobs. this was a woman who had to, all of a sudden, a young woman who had to put aside all of her personal struggles, any thoughts of romance, putting up with people with different views, having to put up with even the rest, all of this, she has to put aside for the simple reason that she's got to survive. So I think in a way she's representative of that whole age group that had to put aside their whole life in order just to survive. Any other thoughts of who the author is thinking about when she describes Joanna?
All the nurses that were on the ship of people who were saving people.
Right, the nurses. Jane, did you have your hand up? No? Okay. So you know what I see is, to me, she was representative also of the whole concept of survivor guilt. She was haunted by this, youthful indiscretion that she had done. And she was haunted by it, that she had survived and her cousin had not. And I think there's a message there that lasts, it lasts forever. That kind of survivor guilt that she had. Any other thoughts? What about Florian? What do we know about him? What are some of his characteristics and how did he strike you? And of course, why is he introduced with the line, "Fate is a hunter"? Well, we know immediately that he is on the run. He's exhausted. He's afraid the Nazis are going to discover his secret and they are looking for him. And we know he's got something precious in his pack. And again, slowly, the story unfolds. And what do we learn he's carrying with him? A piece of the amber room. He's got the most significant piece of the amber room. It was the Fuhrer's favorite piece. It's this amber swan, which, by the way, I think is fictional. As I kind of was looking in about the amber room, I didn't see anything about the swan, so I think that might have been one of her fictitious pieces. But nonetheless, we see his backstory, that he was duped, right? He was taken in. He was duped by false flattery, and he was told that he was this great little art historian, this art restorer, and one day he would provide Hitler's dream of a national art museum in his hometown of Linz, and so he falls for that, and he's working for this Dr. Lang, right? And we're going to see later that some of this is actually based on a little bit of truth here. So
in that respect, Lynda wrote that she had found the information about the wood-eating worms not being in those cold waters very interesting.
Right.
And that while she was in Russia, they were told that the amber room was either melted in the fire or is still hidden. And it was interesting for her to add. So she thought that was interesting for the author to add. And the room that they actually saw was completely redone. So who is to know what is?
Yeah, renovated in 2003. So some of you may have already have been there and seen it. What else can we say about Florian? Was anyone? Was he a hero?
Questionable. That's questionable.
Questionable.
Yeah. I mean, he ended up.
I think he was. Amelia keeps referring to him as the knight.
Mm-hmm.
He was kind of a hero in certain people's minds, and he was a good guy. You certainly had that feeling. Yes. I think the interesting thing is him stealing that amber was like his way of a big bigot Nazis.
It was his revenge, right? His revenge against Hitler and Dr. Lang. Exactly.
Right.
Any other thoughts on that? Eva, do you have your hand up?
Oh, you have a couple comments here that
yes,
you did say, Julia.
Go ahead.
What I would like to remind people of, Florian knows that his father was executed by the Nazis because he was so good at making maps, and he made maps for the would-be assassins of Hitler.
So
and
thank you
he was caught.
Thank you for bringing that up. And so what does Florian do though? Does he follow his father's advice, his footsteps? No. What does he do? He's actually working with the Germans, right? So I was a little bit, I think of all the characters, he displays the biggest change, the arc of change. Because in the beginning, let's face it, he was working with the Germans. He was working with Dr. Lang. He was doing that. He was a soldier, right?
No,
At
he
one
was
time,
not a soldier.
well, not a soldier, but he was working with them in terms of
Yes.
working with the right, working with them. And of course, ultimately, he comes to see the evil that there is, right? And we see him change too. In the beginning, he doesn't want to be the knight, even with Amelia. If you remember, he's trying to get away from her, but she keeps following him. For her own reasons, her own needs too, but she is following him and he is trying to ignore her. Ultimately, when he notices that she reminds him so much of his sister, he softens towards her. So we see this change, and we see that he's really a good guy underneath it all. And of course, he ends up proving to be that. Do you think he was representative in the author's mind of a group of people there, perhaps? I wondered about that. I thought that perhaps Florian was represented of people that were misled, Germans that were misled, and ultimately found their way back to their humanity. Of course, in this case with Florian, tragically for him, by the time he really realized that his father had actually been on the right road and he was not on the right road, it was too late, if you recall. His father was already gone at that point, and he realizes it was too late. So he is portrayed ultimately, would you say he's portrayed as a good German, right, in the story?
You have one comment that came in, Lynda, from Hoffman, and it says that he represents the Germans who didn't realize how bad the Nazi Party was.
Right, and came to realization later on. Yeah. Amelia was a very interesting character. I found her perhaps one of the most moving characters, right? What would you say about her, and why the line that introduces her, "Shame is a hunter"? Jillian, you have to unmute yourself.
Oh, because she was pregnant. I think she was embarrassed about the pregnancy and how it came about. So shame from the pregnancy.
And Leslie has her hand up.
Yeah, well, she was horrified that she was raped by the Russian. And, she made up the story about August, her boyfriend, her lover. And she was just so frightened and so uncomfortable, during the beginning of the story. And then when the baby was born, she couldn't even look at it. And that was heartbreaking. But then Florian was able to say the right things that convinced her. That was really lovely.
Lovely, right.
Diane also has her hand up. Diane, do you want to unmute?
Yeah. Amelia, I thought, was incredibly strong, had a lot of physical state she went through, being, just about to deliver, and she was so young. I thought, and she was very mature in a way beyond her years for the way she handled her situation.
It's interesting too, Diane, you're right. And I'm remembering, as you're talking, I'm remembering this scene when the ship starts to go down. If you remember, she's the one that says to Joanna, because they're in the maternity ward, and she says to Joanna, listen, Joanna's saying, okay, we got to sort of wait for instructions what to do. And she's the one that immediately says to everybody, okay, take blankets, keep yourselves warm, and let's get out of here. Let's make our way to the top decks. So she does take control there. Yeah.
Jackie also said that in reality, this is an interesting comment, that the others were all part of their own doing, but not Amelia.
That she was a true victim, right? Yeah. She was a true victim. And unfortunately, as often, I guess, does happen with rape cases, she saw herself not as the victim so much, just with shame, which was her overriding emotion there. Lynda, did you have,
Yeah. Well, I think, of course, being raped at 16 is horrifying, but I think the disappointment that the people who were entrusted to be her guardian, to protect her under everything, offered her up to save their daughter. And that betrayal of trust and everything she believed in with the rape and then that betrayal, I think she couldn't get above it until she saw the love of this little troop.
Right.
That she started to, understand what counting on people could really be like.
And she kept, just following up on your point, she kept repeating the fact that everyone always leaves her.
Right. Right.
Everyone always leaves her. And of course, don't forget, her mother died in childbirth with the next child, right? So really, in truth, her mother did leave her. And what I was struck with is that she really was, as strong as she was, as mature as she was still a child. And I say that because remember how she used to recite the duckies in a row, all the little fairy tales she used to fantasize. And there's one line where she says she loved talking to the trees because her mother loved trees. And she thinks to herself, mother is an anchor. A girl who has lost her mother is suddenly a tiny boat on an angry sea. Some boats eventually float ashore, and some boats like me seem to float further and further from land. It's interesting because that happens sort of in the middle of the book, and of course we end up realizing that it is foreshadowing of the ending, right?
Barbara also commented, Lynda, that she thinks that her pink hat was a symbol of Amelia's brightness despite her shame.
Right.
And it is interesting that whole pink hat reminded me of that Schindler's List, the very punctuated color. That was what made me think about that in that case. So I thought that was interesting.
Well, Deb, continuing on with your pink hat, that's what Florian found and put on the baby. And she was able to then look at it like rebirth or happiness or joyful. And that was the first time she really looked at her child differently.
Right. It was the first, and he's as he puts the pink hat on, he goes ahead and he says, this child is a Pole. She is your mother. She is you. She is your mother. She is your grandmother, and he's able to make that connection for her that's meaningful.
Yeah.
She was also, what about this fascination that she had with August? What did you make of that? I thought of it as her fantasy. It was the one thing that enabled her to go on, having that thought. And again, she was 15. So what would have been in a normal time a crush became something that just sustained her through all of the difficult times. Anything else you want to say about her? I thought she was, and of course we know she gives birth to a healthy baby girl that she names Halinka after her mother. And I loved also that she was very aware and really loved seeing the relationship growing between Joanna and Florian. And later, little does she know, of course, at that time, how important that relationship between Joanna and Florian is going to end up to be.
And Maxine pointed out also that she must have been traumatized, just the fact that her mother had died in childbirth and that she herself was going to be facing that. So that was definitely something else that was part of her.
The other thing
was a part of her that couldn't cope with the fact that she had been raped. And so she made this whole fantasy, this story around it, which legitimized the baby. And it's like, I got the feeling that it was more than wishful thinking. It was almost a reality that she was living, which was not reality.
Right. But it was enough to sustain her. And that was the most important thing. I think that what she stood for was that just exactly what the author says. At one point, she says, that these were teenagers that were alone, having to make their way. And in the end, many of them were permanently damaged by the war, raped, robbed of their future. The other thing about her, though, that we would have to mention is at the ending. She is so self-sacrificing. So she represents also that group of people that really were willing to sacrifice themselves. If you remember, she had the option of jumping into that lifeboat. And what does she do instead? Do you remember?
Yes.
At the end, what does she do? She puts in the little boy. She puts in the little Klaus, the little 6-year-old, right? And that's the end. That's all that can fit into the boat. And so to me, she also represented these young women who, many of them were so brutalized that they were permanently damaged by the war. Anything else you want to bring up about her? What about Alfred? What did he add to the story, do you think? And of course, why is fear is a hunter? Why is that his introductory line? What does he add to the story? And again, what does he represent? Well, I think he actually offered a little bit of, I don't want to say humor because that wouldn't be the right word to use here, but he does add a certain lightness to it because he's so sociopathic or something like that. You know, he's just, he writes these mental letters that never get sent to his girlfriend, Hannah Laurie. How many of you suspected that Hannah Laurie was not a real girl at that point when he was writing these letters, these mental letters, right? He was not really writing to his girlfriend. So why is his introductory line, fear is a hunter? Because what's the truth about him?
He's a Nazi.
He's a Nazi, real full-blown Nazi, and worse than, or just
He's not fully there. He's
not
got
fully
it
there.
right.
Right.
And that's the whole thing with the medal. He kept thinking that Florian was going to give him a medal.
And he was a coward. He was a coward. And the reason he needed the medal was because everybody knew he was a coward, right? He was a coward, which is why the irony is fear is a hunter, right? And he is in fact afraid of everything.
There's a lot of people that are echoing Alfred, he's a coward, but there is also that Fern said that he's a frightened moderator of the Nazi perspective.
Right.
In a very sick way.
Right, Fern, he absolutely. And he's the one who really sheds a lot of light on what's happening around him. We really see a lot of history through him, right? He's telling us what's happening, the chaos as the people are trying to board, the fights for survival. So he's really the one that's giving us a lot of insight into what's happening around him. What I loved though were his fantasies as opposed to the reality. When he's talking about, it was interesting. He says the boys all, and we get again his backstory. The boys teased. He's writing to Hannah Laurie. You know, the boys teased that I was a coward, not strong enough to serve our country, but how wrong they were. He remembers that he wasn't part of Hitler Youth, and his father was so ashamed. And here he is now, this big hero, and he's happily realizing that the bullies of Hitler Youth are probably dead, smashed underneath the tanks of the Allies. So, you know, he's remembering the fact that he was really looked down upon as a child and certainly as a young adult. It's interesting when he says to Hannah Laurie that he has been selected for an important mission to disinfect the land. Of course, it's funny when he says, you know, one of these days he's going to actually put pen to paper and write one of these real letters. Of course, it's very sad and very poignant as it continues, because he says to her, "You tried to pull your shade, and that was a bad decision trying to keep me out. Your decision, Hannah Laurie, was the wrong one." And as these letters continue, and as you see the backstory, what do you start to realize has really happened? What do you start to realize?
As Phyllis wrote, he turned her in as Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And anything else? I think that one of the things that comes out is that he used to sweep the sidewalk in front of her house. And he once mentioned to Hannah Laurie's father that he wanted a job. And her father, if you remember, kind of ignored him. And he remembered all of that, right? And we see that he watched the Hitler Youths actually come to Hannah Laurie's door. And he says, well, and in the letter, he says, well, don't open it so quickly. You know, there could be wolves at the door. Well, he knows very well there were wolves at the door. So, as I think Jillian said, he really wasn't all there. We know that. What do you think he represents? what group of people would you say that, what's he a composite of, as the author wants to do? She wants us to know that she's doing these composites. What does he represent to you?
The German soldiers who did things without being thoughtful and kind of being pulled into this evil in order to be a good soldier.
You know, following up on that, Jane, at one point, Florian says, he asks a question. He's looking at things around him and he says, what have human beings become? Did war make us like this evil? Or did it just activate the evil already within us?
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of what I think that he represents, the person who already had these terrible, negative, anti-Semitic feelings, everybody else feelings. I feel like he was a sociopath who fed into Hitler's beliefs. He was a person of low achievement. The only thing he could feel superior about was that he was German. It was the only thing he could take pride in. And for that reason, he was drawn to Hitler's teachings. There were other characters too that I think she's really making a point. When she talks about the shoe poet and she talks about the wandering boy, any thoughts you want to bring up about them? What about the relationship between the shoe poet and the wandering boy?
It represents someone who took on a lost child, as a grandfather figure. And I imagine there were a lot of good people who did things like that in the war.
I think you're right. I think it really is showing that beautiful bond that forms between people. And you see that little boy who all of a sudden is calling him Opie, right? Opie. Anything else? How about the shoemaker who says the shoes tell the story? You think it's true?
Mm-hmm.
I think it is true. It was interesting, right? The way he analyzes it. He can tell a lot about Joanna when he looks at her boots. He can tell that someone cared a lot about her, was willing to sacrifice a lot for her. And of course, it's interesting that the shoemaker does suspect something about Florian.
Yes, it does.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay. What does he suspect? Do you remember? He hears the hollow heel as Florian's walking across the floor. He hears the hollow heel and he realizes he doesn't know what he's got in his heel. What do we know that Florian has in his heel? You remember?
Was the key?
He's got the key to the cellar where the amber is hidden, right? And he's also got a map, because remember, the tunnels were very circuitous and impossible to find the actual cellar door. And he's got the map, and he's got that hidden in his shoe. Of course, Ingrid, I think it was easy to figure out what she represented. There were so many of the disabled that were just systematically executed, unworthy of life, as Alfred writes in one of his letters to Hannah Laurie. And we know that she is a blind woman. She becomes separated from her aunt in the chaos at a train station. And fortunately for her, she is found by Joanna. And of course, her loss is so devastating to Joanna. So we see again this sensitivity that Joanna has for everybody that she is with in the group. What about Hannah Laurie herself? What do we know about her? To me, she was the character who was not present, but is actually present in any story about the Holocaust. So truthfully, this is a story about non-Jews, right? About Germans and Lithuanians and Poles. It is not a Jewish story, and yet we see Hannah Laurie. To me, what we see through the letters, that she is the story of a Jewish family betrayed by a neighbor who feels cast aside, scorned in his fantasy of love, who agrees with Hitler's idea of a master race. And so through the letters to Hannah-Laurie, we're able to see what is happening. And he even questions at one time. He's so excited that he's got this ID badge that has a number on it. Remember, he says, Hannah-Laurie, I'm wondering, do you have a number? Do you have a number on you? So again, we have all of this foreshadowing of the camps. So my question about this book, as we look back on it, is what would you say are, in fact, how are we doing? I think we're running a little late, but just,
You're good. You're good.
yeah. In terms of history, what did we all learn about the sinking of the ship? Anything else that you want to mention that you did not know that you've learned from the book?
Jackie wrote that she loved the quote, "War is a catastrophe. It breaks families in irretrievable pieces. Yes, biological families, but it also helps us, by the grace of God, find other families. And that to me is really fate and love."
Beautiful. Just before we close, I just want to ask you, why do you think the author decided to end the book as she did, though?
Diane actually wanted, if you could discuss that a little bit more about what happened with Amelia. Did her body, was she, not alive when they found her? That was the question, because I think.
So I probably, a lot of us had to do this. I reread that ending, and I thought it was very beautiful on several levels. Because we do know one thing from a lot of the research that people have done and from a lot of the firsthand tales, that bodies did arrive on the shores, that from the sinking, they did arrive on the shores. So it is a plausible ending. And I think there were several things that the author was showing at the end. Yes, it was her body that drifted towards the shore. And you kind of see that when you read over the chapter before the last chapter. She's kind of hallucinating at the end. Do you remember? That was quite beautiful, actually, as she's hallucinating. She's back in her mother's kitchen, and she's waiting for her Jewish friends to come back so she can have tea with them. And little Halinka is there. Her child is there. You realize it's a hallucination because she's got her mother there, her baby there, who's now growing up. And so it's really, and her last line is, "For the first time in a long time, I am not afraid." So you realize that in a way she was at peace and her body did drift ashore. So I think that the ending, what she's really trying to show here, is the long-term effects on people, because Florian gets this letter. He gets this letter from this woman who actually found the body. Her husband found the body, right, of Amelia, washed against their shore of their cottage. And the woman writes, she doesn't know who Amelia is, but we find out, what does she do, this woman? Do you remember? It was very loving. She receives the body in a very loving way. And of course, we know at the end that she ends up taking care of the body, and she lets us know that the body is now resting in the rose bushes, right? A beautiful section of roses on her property. So you see this incredible kindness of strangers. But she ends up writing to Florian, and it's so interesting how she finds about Florian, who Amelia is, through Florian, because she opened up the pack. Remember Amelia, if you remember at the very last scene on the ship, Amelia ends up on a raft. Can you all remember what I'm saying? Amelia ends up on a raft, and she's ending up with Alfred on the raft and the pack that has this amber swan in it, right? And on another raft is the knight, who she's of course calling the knight as she's fantasizing. It is Florian, along with, of course, Joanna, and they've got the newborn baby Halinka with them in their boat. So what we see is that when this woman finds this body, she doesn't know who it is, but she does open up the pack, and she sees the name Florian, she sees Joanna, because he's written a diary. And she sees the name Amelia, and she realizes the girl's name is Amelia, and she's hoping that she tries to find talk to the Red Cross. She's trying to find out, in fact, who this child is. And of course, she can come up with nobody. There are no survivors to that family. Nobody's looking for Amelia. It isn't until many years later that all of a sudden she's reading an article in the paper, and what does she see? A young woman who ironically enough wants to become she's an Olympic swimmer, and they're having trouble finding out her nationality because she's born on a ship. And of course, it's ironic that Halinka ends up being an Olympic swimmer because, of course, the sea is, of course, the cause of her mother's demise. So it's kind of an interesting ending. But she finds out, she puts it together, and this woman reaches out to Florian, and she writes to him, and it's 24 years later, because now Halinka is, of course, that age. And this article was written about Halinka. So she puts it together, the woman puts it together, reaches out to Florian, and we can see that he's still so uncomfortable reliving memories of the war. So I think that the author is showing us the long-term effects of the war and the sinking of the ship on the survivors. But I think the ending also shows something else. Did you see anything else in the ending?
Jackie commented that she thought the actual facts that she said at the end were very enlightening, which is the fact like that at the end of the book that she's
yes, exactly.
You know, if you read through all of that, that was really
right.
worthwhile. Yeah.
To me, though, with the very ending of the story, I loved what it showed, the resilience of the survivors. In the end, they had all this discomfort with reliving memories, but in the end, they formed a family, Joanna and Florian, and they created this family. They were raising, and they had adopted Halinka and the 6-year-old boy, Klaus, and they had created a family even after their many losses during the war. So I think she's showing about the long-term effects of war, the amazing resilience of survivors, and the third thing is the incredible kindness of the strangers. I think that was important.
How realistic, Lynda, excuse me, how realistic is it that she would have gotten Florian's address to be able to write a letter like that?
She tells us, she actually says in the story that she put it together when she saw Halinka, and she contacted a friend in the States who was able to find it in all kinds of directories. I guess they were able to look it up through the article. Don't forget, it was an article in the paper.
I missed that. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, any other thoughts? I wanted to share with you a little bit about the Amber Room. She does talk about that. It really is amazing. I'm hoping that many of you will have the opportunity to see it, or else just to look online under the Amber Room, because there is a photograph of the new reconstructed Amber Room. Any other thoughts that you want to talk about with the book? I think Jackie started to talk a little bit about the takeaway message. Jackie, what was your takeaway message? I think you had touched on it before from the book.
Well, I think a lot of it was, it simplifies it to say war is hell, but it really is. And I did love that quote about the catastrophe, and just what you said at the end. They lost all their families, they lost everything, and yet they came together and they found everything. So there really is resilience, and there is light at the end of that tunnel.
Right. I think that is the takeaway message, that, even in the midst of darkness, I think the author actually says it, that hope still prevails. So I thought that was kind of a nice way to end this. So I hope you enjoyed the book, enjoyed our conversation, and looking forward to seeing you all next month. And lovely to see you all, as usual.
Thank you, Lynda. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
Lynda and Debbie, both of you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you. I love the book, and I
Bye,
love
thank
the
you.
discussion. Thank you.